Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Wednesday afternoon here on Kobold Press. I'm Little Red Dot, and thank you so much for joining us for Kobold Chats, where we talk all things Kobold Press. I'm really excited, one, because I'm back on land, and two, because I'm joined by fresh faces that I have not ever had a chance to sit down and talk with, all of which have contributed to a brand new book that Kobold Press has out right now. You can go grab the PDF, or if you're like me and you're a hard copy junkie, you can get your printed copy in pre-order at the moment, and that is Kobold Press's Guide to Worldbuilding Volume 2. It has an incredible group of writers on it, and I'm lucky enough to get to sit down with some of them and the editor today. So we will take questions at the end. Feel free, if like a question rings in your head and you want to get it out, toss it in chat, but if I miss it, you may have to remind me. We're going to save most of those towards the end, and I say we dive in. I want to know a little bit about all of you, so I imagine chat does too. So let's start with just a basic round of who you are, and maybe quickly what you did for this, and we'll dive a little deeper. And I'm gonna be chaotic and go counterclockwise. Coral, you're up. Coral, you're up first on my screen. Tell us who you are.
Okay, counterclockwise is exciting. Oh,
Yeah.
the dog is there. You can see the dog's butt. Anyway, that's a good introduction. Hi, I'm Coral. I'm Coral Alejandra Moore, specifically. I am a writer of science fiction and fantasy for the most part. I also am a player and a DM of TTRPGs. And my piece for this book was called Weave Your Worlds Thread by Thread, Guide to Diverse and Inclusive World Building. And that's it for the quick rundown, actually.
Nice. All right. Moving counterclockwise. Rajan, you're up.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rajan Khanna. I'm a writer and a gamer. I've been gaming for about almost 40 years now, which is crazy. But
Wow.
Before I even was writing, that was like a love of mine for since I was a kid. And I write also science fiction and fantasy. I had a 3-novel post-apocalyptic airship series come out some years back. Otherwise, some short stories and things. But yeah, and my essay in the book is called Worldbuilding and the Importance of Space.
Nice.
Also, he's written a bunch of awesome supplements on DM's Guild.
Go check out DM's Guild. Nice.
Yeah, and also both John and I have contributed to some subclasses to the Tome of Heroes, which is coming out.
Oh, nice. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. I'm very excited for Tome of Heroes. My players are excited for Tome of Heroes. Very nice. And John Joseph Adams.
So I'm an editor mainly of science fiction and fantasy. But like Raj, I've been a gamer basically my whole life. And gaming is really what propelled me into editing and being creative at all in the first place. So it's all coming full circle now that I've gotten my grubby little fingers into tabletop role-playing games as a professional. So yeah, I've edited about more than 30 anthologies. I had a novel line for Myth in the Harcourt the last 5 years, and
oh, nice.
Yeah, and then now I edited this anthology of essays. This is the first book of essays I've done, So yeah, we could talk more about the process of that or whatever. I don't know how you want to transition into that.
Yeah.
But,
well, it seems that all of you actually come from somewhere before tabletop. In terms of writing, that you were all or editing, or writing and editing other things. I want to know a little bit about that. I heard there's novels and short stories and all kinds of stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about, each of you can go around, where did you get started writing? Like what was it? Just like I went from being a kid writing stories and that is what I wanted to do. But what is your little bit of your origin story? We'll call it. No particular order if you feel inspired, by all means.
I'll go. So I mean, basically, what inspired me to go in this creative direction was trying to DM for the first time. I mean, basically playing D&D. I got the urge to like do something creative, and so my first thought was, well, I'll try to DM something. So I wrote my own adventure, and I was like 17, and it was terrible. Like, I mean, the adventure was terrible. I also hated it because like I love playing D&D and I love the idea of DMing back then, but it's like the interactive elements I just couldn't deal with, and I just wasn't ready for it at that time. And then so
I don't think any of us ever are.
Right.
Not our first time.
Right. And then so my brother-in-law suggested, well, why don't you try writing stories or something? And so Yeah, yeah. And it's like, so then I just started writing a novel, and I diligently worked on it every day, like in a way that it seems ridiculous in hindsight. It's like, how did I do that? Like, I've never been able to stick to anything like I did to that. And I mean, and it was also terrible. No, not to front like it was good or anything, but I did write a whole novel, and then when I went to college, I started taking English or creative writing classes, and then that's when I learned about editing and stuff.
The
And
great,
after,
yeah, the thing that all writers need so desperately.
right,
Our editors are our lifesavers.
yeah, yeah. And then so after college, I got a job at the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction,
Oh,
which is, yeah, it's been around since like 1949, and so it's like one of the longest running magazines that publishes short science fiction and fantasy. Um, and so yeah, I worked there as an assistant for like 9 years, and then I launched my own magazine, Lightspeed, and that's been going on since 2010.
wow.
And since around 2008, I started editing anthologies, and so I've been doing a couple of those a year for the last bunch of years. I'm also the series editor of Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, so it's like I try to read everything that's published in the year, and then we winnow it down to the best 20 stories.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Man, you must do a lot of reading.
Yeah, a little bit.
I
Yeah.
was going to say, as an editor of all of that, you must do a lot
Yeah.
of reading.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I imagine you see a lot of inspiring and not inspiring things.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the slush pile, which is like I don't know if that term is known in tabletops, but that's the sort of what you call unsolicited submissions, like when you have
Gotcha.
an open submission period, and that's the term publishing uses. They call it the slush pile. But yeah, I mean, you see all kinds of stuff in there, but everybody's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
It's
And I
getting,
imagine
yeah.
it makes you a better writer.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you can,
Like,
you've seen
Yeah.
it now from the other side of the table.
absolutely. What I always say is, like, the best thing any developing writer can do is read some slush, and but do it like on a real basis. Like, commit to doing a lot of it if you can. Like, if you can find somebody that will let you read slush for them,
Right.
absolutely, you level up your game. No other method.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. What about our other two guests? Where did you get started? Where does your origin story hail from?
I can go next, I guess. My origin story is not that different, actually, from John's. I wrote like some terrible poetry and stories in high school
Yep.
that are hopefully buried and long buried somewhere in
I
a
tell people
landfill.
out there somewhere is my live journal, and I hope it is dead. I hope it is so
Yeah,
dead.
yeah. So that was like real casual writing. I wasn't serious about being a writer. I ended up going to school for biology, so I was very like
Oh.
into crunchy science in that period of my life.
Hmm.
And then when I left school, because I had already built up a whole bunch of debt and I didn't know how I was going to pay for it, and I didn't want to finish because I was going to have even more debt. And this was years ago too. This was before the current
long before-
problem. Right, like I don't even want to look at the numbers now, but at that time I was like, no, I have to go start working. I have to make money, because at that time, working in biology, you couldn't get a job with less than a PhD. So I was like,
oh
well,
yeah,
I'm
one
not
of
going
those
to do
sciences.
8 more years of this and ring up even more debt and all
Right.
that. But anyway, that's way off topic. Wow.
No, it's part of the
Anyway,
origin
so-
story. It's important. It's important.
I guess.
And
It's
then
why
she
I
got
write
bit by a
science so
radioactive
much.
spider, and
Exactly,
in the lab.
in the lab, of course. No, it probably would have been a radioactive crayfish, if anything. I was kind of into the marine stuff, so that would have been terrible. It had big claws and whatever.
Mhm.
I feel a new monster coming on.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, for
radioactive
sure.
crayfish. Mark it down.
So then, after working like 15 years toiling in corporate America, I was like,
Oof.
wow, is this not for me? I need to do something more creative. I need to do something a little more fulfilling.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, I did like writing at one point, so let me try that for a while. And so I began the very slow process of figuring out how to do writing. And I think that started in like 2010 or so. Around there is when I really decided, hey, this is a thing I would like to do. I want to learn more about it. And so I've written some short stories that have been published in a few different places. I've written, I think, 6 novels total. None of them have been published yet, but we'll see.
Yet. I love the yet. That is the optimism we
Yet.
all need.
Yeah, and actually, I'm most excited about the one I'm writing now. So we'll see how that
cool.
works out. And then my husband has always been into RPGs for like a long time back in the old days. And he was always trying to get me to do it. But because it was kind of only me and him, I was like, this is awkward and weird. I don't like this. I didn't know how to do it. Like, and then when the pandemic came actually, and everybody started playing online, we had the opportunity to play online a lot more.
Yep.
And that was, I think, when it really occurred to me, oh, this is how you do this thing. This is fun. And so I started shifting kind of more that way. So
nice. And so you kind of went from writing on your own to kind of shifting into tabletop after you started playing more.
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
cool.
For sure.
I just want to interject. For one thing, I know Brandon Sanderson wrote like 8 novels before he sold one. So, you know, it can happen. You know, and then he sold those other ones, by the way. But but also Coral and I have a interesting origin story together for
true.
Tabletop because so for one thing, well, she read Slush for me at Lightspeed for a while, and so you know she can attest that it helps. But then also we first played D&D together at this writer retreat, and then we were like early adopters of COVID because the retreat was happening right when COVID was first coming around, and
March of 2020.
Yeah, nobody knew how scary and serious it was yet, but so we still went.
Nobody knew anything about masks, so none of us were masked.
Right? They were explicitly saying don't wear masks. But
we were using hand sanitizer, and we thought we were
good.
Yeah. But so we played for the first time at this retreat, and she organized a one shot, and it's like we played like a 16th level one shot, and like I made all the characters for everybody because it was like not everybody knew the rules and everything, and I was just like, oh, I want to make this happen. How can I help DM? You know. So anyway, and then that's why she's here now, basically, because it's like I didn't even know that she was so into tabletop until that happened. So.
Wow, I love that. Yes, that's the perfect emote in chat. Bringing our kobolds together. Love it. And last but certainly not least, how'd you get started?
I think I was always interested in storytelling, and I think, my early days it used to be me and this one kid who started playing D&D when I was young, and it eventually devolved into something where we were just telling each other the stories rather than actually playing the game after a while. But I was also a huge bookworm, and I always just kind of wanted to do that thing I loved. And I remember even in 8th grade, we had to do a creative writing thing, and I wrote a fantasy story, and it was pretty much a D&D adventure, like a guy shooting arrows at orcs and killing them, and then like going to rescue somebody. And but so that kind of stuck with me for a while. I always thought I would go into writing, and I had all these great ideas, but I went through this one long period where I would start all these novels and then stall out after I don't know, the first 3 chapters or something. And it wasn't until later that I sort of started taking it seriously and, reading books and listening to people. And, the first thing is you have to finish something in order to like even think about getting it somewhere. And then, the first things you finish aren't going to be great. And so it was kind of a long process. I've had a sort of day job, the normal 9-to-5 job for over 20 years now, or about 20 years now. So it's sort of been in and out of that. But I would say that, you guys mentioned the slush. I think for me, one of the big things that helped me level up and still continues to help me level up, if you can find one, is a writing group where we teach each other stories. So before anything ever goes out in the world, it's usually had other people read it and give feedback on. And I would even say that the best education I've gotten from that experience is actually not from people giving me feedback, but from me reading other people's stories and trying to figure out what's working and what isn't working there. So it's a similar kind of thing to the slush, but it's been super helpful for me. But I guess about 15 years ago, I had my first story published, and John was actually the one who published my first story.
Oh, nice! Look at that.
So that's, I guess, my origin connection there. And then since then, I've just kind of been doing it here and there, sort of alternating short stories and novels. But yeah, it's something that I really, really enjoy, and it helps kind of tap into the whole like rampant imagination problem.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I have to know, because clearly all 3 of you have both read and written a lot of stuff. What is your favorite thing? It could be the thing everybody else hated.
Mm-hmm.
It could be the thing that never got published, or that thing that like got put into a slush pile, but you were just terribly proud of. What is the one thing that like you really love that you think is kind of your beacon of your writing style?
Mm-hmm.
Anybody got one?
Oh, we're talking about things that we wrote,
Yeah,
right?
you
Yeah.
wrote stuff that you
Okay.
wrote.
Oh boy, that is a really hard question.
It's always hard to be like, I
probably
love
writers
my
are-
stuff.
Right. Well, I think I have the opposite problem. I'm my own worst critic, right?
Oh, okay.
I'm like, oh, it's all terrible. I think the thing I'm proudest of actually is I wrote a story that is set in post-colonial Puerto Rico for the
Oh.
first time, and it's like a science fiction story. And I never thought anyone was going to publish it because it was like very fluffy and very like optimistic and all that kind of stuff. And it just got published in Solarpunk magazine this January.
Oh, wow.
And they somebody bought it, and I was so happy that somebody bought it and actually wanted to pay me for this thing that really came from my heart.
That's awesome.
In a way that not a lot of my stories have come from that soft part of me, you know, where you're like, oh, it's a pretty little baby.
Yeah, this is vulnerability here on the page.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. That's very cool. What about you, gents?
Well, for me, I mean, you know, it's like as an editor, I guess, I mean, I would just pick like one particular project. And, you know, whereas with novels, I don't feel like I have ownership over them because I'm, you know, that's the author's work.
Sure.
Whereas an anthology, like I feel like I have much more of a creative contribution to it. And so for me, like the thing that I'm proudest of is Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, just because it's like my love letter to science fiction and fantasy. It's like it's me doing my best to sort of take it and try to elevate it as much as I can, because, you know, being part of the Best American series is like, that's like a big deal. Like they never had a science fiction and fantasy you know, volume until I pitched it and I got them to do it. And so just by being in the company of that series that's been published continuously for like 100 years, you know, more than 100 years, it gives us an ability to sort of raise up science fiction and fantasy to where it can be talked about in the same conversations as these great literary works, which I mean, and I always have thought that like the greatest works of science fiction and fantasy are on par with the works in any genre, like regardless of genre. So and those lines are blurring a lot more these days. Like today, it wouldn't be as strange to encounter the same story in Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy and Best American Short Stories, you know? And I think that may have happened once. There was a Ted Chiang story that I think may have ended up in both. But in any case, that's the thing that I love most.
I love that. Okay, very cool.
It's hard to pick one because I feel like, you know, it changes, and I sometimes love things and then decide I don't love them anymore. And then I love them. But I would say the one that I feel, there's probably two. So one is actually out on submission right now. It's just a weird story that came to me in a dream. In my dream, I was reading someone else's story, and it was this story. And I woke up and I was like, yes, it's not real. Like I can write it. And I've worked on it for years until I finally, it took, you know, it had like 3 wrong endings until I found the right ending. And I'm really happy with it now. And I kind of want it to be published, but as a weird story. So that's one of them. And then
it's
the
like
other
an
one,
Inception piece. It was like, I love that you got it from a dream from somebody else. That's like deep subconscious stuff. Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
That is really
and that's
cool.
part of the fun of it too. But the other story that was published, I think that I'm proud of, was in Fantasy Magazine. I think it's last year, but COVID has destroyed my already tenuous grasp on time. But it's called Your Ticket to Hell. It's a short little story, but it was like sort of something that I was able to tap into a place that I hadn't, I think, been able to as a writer before. And so, yeah, that's probably the one that's out there that I'm proud of right now.
That's very cool.
I would just say for Raj, he has a story called Card Sharp that I think tabletop people would definitely enjoy. It's like a weird Western, but it's got a super cool magic system using like a deck of cards as like the arcane focus basically, and also your spells. I guess it's like you're using your cards to cast your spells. But it's like it's so dope. Like honestly, like you guys gotta check it
Raj
out.
is out here holding out on us.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay. Now Chad has a question, and I am going to get to that because I would like to know that as well. We have Kobold Press has a big old library of stuff, but all of you have collaborated on this new world building guide, volume 2. And we've got 2 of our essay writers here, and I'm very excited about the specific essays that each of you wrote. But you said that you like gathering anthologies. And for something like this, where we're talking about world building, I imagine you have to have a lot of people that know about world building and know what that kind of looks like. We'll start with a question for you, and then I'm going to come to our 2 writers, more about your essays. What are you looking for when you start to piece together something that is an information anthology?
Right. Well, in this particular one, we wanted to branch the worlds of prose fiction and tabletop design. And so if you look at the table of contents, you'll see that it's like kind of half and half between people who are primarily game designers and people who are primarily fiction writers. And so I wanted to have that kind of broad information sort of access from these different kinds of brains,
right,
to get it all together, because ideally the lessons that you can learn from building a world for a novel can apply to a tabletop adventure or whatever, or tabletop world, and then vice versa. And just thinking about it in these different contexts, I think can unlock different ideas in your head. So I think it's really interesting in that way. But then otherwise, I mean, it's just thinking about who are people that have produced interesting works in this space that we can tap into and see what do they have to say on this particular topic. In some of them, it was more of a sort of belief in what their previous work has been, and just trusting that they're going to, if they say yes to writing this, that what they're going to send is good.
Right.
And of course, I mean, there's always the chance that it just doesn't work, and then you don't have to accept it if somebody turns in something that's just not workable. But there's also editing and stuff. It's like if it needs work. And then also I guess the other thing is just people who I know, on the fiction side, for instance, if they've written worlds that are really well developed, and so yeah, so those are all the kind of thought processes that go into it, and of course there's people that you think of first, and you want to ask, and you try to ask, and you just can't reach them, or they can't do it, they don't have the time, and so it's a big job of wrangling to send out the invites and keep everybody on task too. Once they say yes, no, but how about if I give you well, how about if I give you an extra week? How about if I give you an extra 2 weeks? How about if I give you a month?
Nice.
And it's like a bargaining game where you
gotta feel it out and get the project done.
Yeah.
That's really
This one came along pretty well though. I didn't have a lot of people just bail on us. So
now we had 15 writers on it, which means 15 essays.
18.
18.
Yeah.
Whew,
yeah,
that's a lot of writers, and I imagine each one brought something very specific to the table. As you said, you kind of curated that space to involve what each person was good at, which is kind of what leads me to our 2 writers here, because you have very different topics. So I thought we'd just take a second, without giving too much away. Obviously, you can't read the essay to us, but I'd love to hear from each of you what topic you were assigned, and what you kind of brought to the table around that topic in this essay. And Raj, you know what? You've been going last, so you get to go first.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I live in New York, so I'm always worried about street noise coming in.
Oh, no worries.
So thank you. I was, first of all, I was very excited when John mentioned this to me, because, as somebody who's really passionate about gaming and writing, it was like, wow, I get to sort of split the middle in this way and talk to people on both sides. And I agree that there's a lot of things in common. But yeah, I mean, when it was first raised, I was, you always rack your brains and think well, what's my approach? Because I want to say what everyone else is saying. You want to try to give something useful. And I was sort of inspired by a recent discussion on social media. There's a writer that I love named Jeffrey Ford. John knows him. He's published him in the past. If you like short fiction at all, he's one of the best ones out there. But he raised this idea about he was kind of poo-pooing, in a fun way, the world building term, and saying you're using your imagination. You're not assembling or building something, making, because the idea of building something feels almost mundane or sort of putting Lego blocks together, which is not how it feels to a lot of people when you're building those things. So that was sort of one place I started from, in that, you know, we're not building tables when you're building a world, because a table, you build a table, you walk away from the table exists on its own.
Right.
You know, whether you're writing a story or you're trying to create a world for people to play games in, you depend on, in games especially, you need your players there, otherwise an adventure isn't like alive. It doesn't happen. And in fiction, and this was a moment for me as a learning writer where, you know, it was like the eureka light bulb, is that you can put a story together, but you know, your story does not really exist outside your own mind until a reader brings their mind to it. So like writing, when you put it out there in the world, it becomes a synthesis of the reader and your words together. Like they bring their brain to the party. So like, you know, what they see in their head is different from what the next person will see in their head, probably, you know, with slight variations. And so it was that idea that as a writer of games or stories, it's sort of important to leave space so that your player or your reader can join in with what you're presenting.
Right.
It's more explicit in a game because you're actually laying it out there for people to participate in it. But as a writer too, you want, you know, somebody's going to remember a story where it came alive in their head and they got to put it down and, you know, almost like living a whole universe on their own. And I feel like if you leave space for people to kind of come into it, then that will create a more intense experience. So.
That's very cool. So the essay is a little bit about that, of like, how do we make the space for it to be like an organic world building and not this kind of concrete, like, I love that Lego analogy.
Yeah, and just to say, like, I think, you know, when you look at somebody like Tolkien, you know, like he put so much effort and detail into genealogies and languages and histories and all these kind of things. And I feel like, at least for me, there was this feeling that I needed to do that to have a really great world for somebody to kind of experience. But I feel like you can do it in such a way where you brick everything up and then there's no space for people to like wander around.
Right.
That was sort of the idea.
This is a lot. We actually get this question. I mentioned this before we went live. PAX, this past year, PAX U, we did a world building panel with some of the writers that contributed to the original, and then some GMs that build worlds. And one of the questions we got a lot about is like, how do I build a world where my characters still feel like they can affect it? And I think that says a lot. You know, if you have everything laid out, what if they have a really great idea and now you don't have space for it?
Right.
And so I think it's a really important topic of like making, I love that, the importance of space, world breathing, as it's labeled in your essay. I love that, world breathing. Really cool topic. And I imagine it's probably not just relevant to tabletop. Sometimes it can be relevant in other places or in other writing as well.
Yeah, I think so. Go ahead.
If I could jump in with an example, one of the things that when Raj was just talking, that was reminding me of is there's a story I published, which is one of my favorite stories I've ever published. It's called Biographical Fragments of the Life of Julian Prince by Jake Kerr. I published it in Lightspeed. It's online, so you could just go read it. But it's like written in this series of excerpts. Like some of them are like it's from a Wikipedia excerpt. It's an excerpt in an interview. It's an excerpt from a novel, and it's all like it's a post-apocalyptic setting where a comet or an asteroid, I can't remember, has crashed into the Earth, and it's basically destroyed North America. And a bunch of people have been refugees, and so they've scattered throughout the rest of the world, where like the world didn't end, but North America basically did. Sure. And so the protagonist is like the person who best documented the experience of living through this catastrophe. And it's just amazing because like as you read the story, it's like there's the text of the story there, but there's like this entire world that you can see in the margins of the story that is just constructed from your imagination as you're reading it. And it's like the best example I've ever seen of that experience, where it's like it almost feels surreal to read it.
Right. Because you're making up the world.
Yeah.
Like it's enough to give you enough hints, but your brain is like Raj said, filling in kind of the blank spots. Yeah. Everybody's will fill it in differently. That's very cool. What about you, Coral? What essay did you
I actually
write?
kind of just wanted to add something to the end of that. I was just thinking about it as they were talking. it's kind of like the concept of white space in art, right?
Oh,
That you're,
yeah.
or negative space,
Negative
sorry.
space, yeah.
That you're kind of drawing around the thing that you want to highlight in a way that leaves room for it to be its own thing too. Which is really
that's
cool.
actually a really great metaphor for that. That's very nice. I love art metaphors. They're my favorite.
Yeah, I do too.
I love art metaphors. Cool.
So my essay was all about how to make worlds more inclusive and how to bring diversity into your world building in a way that helps everybody feel included. And so the focus of my essay was kind of like, well, how do I do this? How do I make people, especially people who are not like me, feel included when I make a world? And so unsurprisingly, kind of the dancing around the topic we've been talking about for a while, one of my biggest points is you should read. You know, you need to read about people who are different than you. That's how you learn about them. Unless you can go somewhere and, you know, meet people who are different than you, that's even better, but especially now that's a little difficult. So yeah, read things from people's points of views who are not yours. Try to learn as much as you can about a wide variety of people who are different from you, and not in a way that you like take specific things and put them in your world, but that you understand that kind of all cultures are a tapestry of all the different people that live in them, and that is what makes worlds feel diverse. So like, instead of having the one culture that has the one religion, that has the one, you know, economic system, you actually have people inside there that don't like that, people that really like it, people that would like to do anything else but that, you know, and you have all these different kinds of people together that make up that one world. And so that was kind of the idea behind everything that I suggest in my essay.
Really important topic too. Another one we get a lot of questions on, especially I think, is a lot of GMs want to be more inclusive and more diverse. There's like a genuine want there for that, that I think comes from a really genuine place of like, how do I do this? So I imagine it's chock full of really great information, but yeah, like to diversify, you have to diversify your mindset and the stories of other people and other cultures. You know, and I think there are some worlds that do it great, and obviously some that don't. So I think that's a really cool topic. Gents, do y'all have thoughts on that? I imagine, you know, you've written a fair share of worlds. How do you make them diverse and inclusive as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm half Indian, so on my father's side, my family is Indian, and I think about this a lot because, you know, what Coral said is exactly right. I mean, just within that one country, you have a variety of languages, a variety of religions. You know, people from one region eat a different food than people from a different religion, which is common in many places. And, you know, even my, you know, on my father's side, immigrant experience is very different from what it's like to grow up there and what that person from the next place. And so I think that there's sort of like a fractalness of diversity, and that, you know, you think of all these different regions and then you dive in and there's even more, you know, differences. And I think that is, I mean, that is an important thing to just, I think people take shortcuts saying that, you know, they want to create like one thing, you know, like I think of the Klingons on Star Trek, you know, are always talking about honor and drinking blood wine. Like, there's got to be some other Klingons out there who are like into books or something,
right?
You know,
or are totally dishonorable and prefer brandy. You know what I mean?
Right, I think that, you know, if you're using it as a sort of like, I feel like it's an ease thing, you know, like if you want to just try to make all your dwarves one specific way, but I think it's more, you know, again, talking about things coming alive, it's way more alive and realistic when you can show different layers and different types. And sometimes that's the most fun thing, is when you have like the one Klingon who likes, writes poems or something, you know, like that.
Yeah.
Kind of...
Y'all, make it happen. Klingon poetry. Go. I am here for that. I want that character. Yeah, but
I imagine
think
it would
really
be much.
Point.
Yeah. I imagine it would be much like Vogon poetry.
Oh no.
Well, now this I think brings up a question that chat has asked, and we'll start moving into that chat. So if you have more questions, I've got two pending, but please continue to ask. Which is, having each of you done a lot of writing, editing. Sometimes you've been the person to sift through the piles of not great stuff, or maybe you're just a fan of really great writers. how do you determine good writing and what needs revision? That is really hard, I think, sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's as an editor, when you're looking for things, it's not really something like that's a formula that you can just explain. I mean, it's like there's any number of things you look for. There's voice and originality and character and all of these things, and any number of and any one of these things could grab my interest and like make me want to finish reading a story. And then there's various points along the way where I could lose it. My interest could be lost from what I'm reading. But you know, it's really just like it's just like a thing that you just know. And so unfortunately it's like one of those hard things where like you can't really explain exactly what it is, because the thing is, it's like I can read through a bunch of slush, like say I go through just a bunch all at once, and I can be reading the stories and I can just feel like, oh, like is there something wrong with me because I'm not like, am I just like not in the mood because I'm not liking anything? And then I come across that one story, I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's good. Like everything's fine. It's just I've read a bunch of bad stories or stories that I didn't like anyway.
Yeah.
And so like yeah, it's just like it just comes to you and you're like but in terms of like writers often want to know like what is the easiest way to sort of stand out, and I would say voice. It's the hardest thing to pull off. It's the hardest thing to learn. It's the hardest thing to even really identify exactly what it is. But again, it's like one of those things where it's like, well, you know it when you see it, and it's like one thing that I would always suggest is like you find writers who you think do have a very interesting voice. So there's people like Kelly Link, where like she's a short story writer. If you read a Kelly Link story, you can probably tell when you read a story, even if her name is not on it, that it's a Kelly Link story. And that's an extreme example. Like not everybody has a voice that strong that you can identify it like that, but that's kind of the thing that like can really make you stand out. It's not as relevant in tabletop, because it's like, the DM's the only one reading
right,
your,
they're the voice,
your writing. Yeah. But, I mean, I think that kind of thing could come through in,
but, pitches are
even
really
an
important. Before you ever get to write an adventure, usually you have to pitch it. That still needs that voice. It still needs that uniqueness to it,
Right.
Yeah. What about our two writers? How do you know when it's like good and not good? And whether it's your work or somebody else's?
You want to go first, or you want me to?
I mean, I would just say I'm never like, or I think it's hard sometimes to tell your own work, because sometimes you might have blind spots, and if you've been working on something for if it's a novel, you might even be working for years. You start to get used to your own stuff, and then people might be like, well, chapter 2, I don't know why this character decides to go on the journey, and you're like, oh God, why? So luckily you can go back and fix that. But I mean, I think that's where the importance of having other people reading your work even before you finish it can be helpful, because they might pick up on the stuff that you just never saw in the first place. In terms of other people, I'll just say that for me, again, I think when it's really good, it just clicks sometimes. And like John said, I think it's a voice or a confidence or something where the person knows exactly the story they're writing, and that, you can read through to the end without any issues. I do think that there's a subjective nature, because some people like certain kinds of things and some people don't. Like I love a story that kicks me in the gut, as I'm reading it, or like at the end. And if I walk away feeling like, oh my God, that's sort of a great story for me. But, other people look at different things. But I think that it's I can tell when something isn't working for me. And again, with critiquing other people's stuff, you can usually say like, oh, I don't like this character. This character doesn't seem realistic. I'm going to paraphrase something I read from Neil Gaiman a long time ago, but it stuck with me, is that in those moments, you might not actually identify the right thing that's wrong with that section, or somebody tells you something that's wrong with your story. That might not be the exact right thing, but there is something wrong, and you need to figure out how to fix it.
Figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a metal detector. You know it's in the area. You're just gonna dig up where it is, right? Like
Oh yeah,
that's
I like that.
Yeah, that's a really good piece. And of course, Neil Gaiman himself said something. So take it to heart.
Yeah.
What about you, Coral?
I think going back to something John said earlier, I think reading slush is one of the best ways to level up your own writing. And the reason for that, I think specifically, is because it's way easier to see problems in other people's writing than it is to see in your own writing.
Yeah.
And that's why critique groups work really well for this too. Like you can put your finger exactly on what feels wrong in someone else's story. And then you can be like, oh, I did that. Oh, in that one story, that's why it doesn't work. That's why no one bought it. Okay, let me go fix that. I can fix this now. So it's very easy to diagnose similar problems in your work that you see in other people's work. I've been reading slush for a pretty long time, and it's a really hard thing to quantify. I think John was right about that too, because like there's no recipe. Like when you read something, it either sparkles or it doesn't. And you know, when you read it, you're like, yes, this is the thing. Even if it needs work, sometimes you can still see the thing in there that is beautiful and wonderful. And especially I think when you read slush for a really long time, you get very quick. You can read a page and be like, oh, okay, this one's not for me. Or you can read a page and be like, it doesn't matter what else they've said. This is for me. And kind of going back to another point that was made, not everybody's going to agree on that, right? One of the most interesting experiences I've had recently is working with someone else editing something, and we disagreed on what story should be included. And we both had really good reasons. And the things we were talking about were both objectively good, but for reasons that, because we're two different people, one thing touched me and the other thing touched her, and we just had a different feeling about them. So that can be really interesting too, seeing what other people like. I think that's a really valuable experience too.
All right, y'all. So what I'm hearing is go start reading slush. That's the best way. Look, when I first
It
started
is
acting
really
years
good
ago,
for your writing.
they tell you the best thing that you can do for yourself as an actor is to take a day and be a casting assistant and go sit in a room and do nothing but like read sides with people coming in, because you get to see the chaos and the stupid things, or the like not professional, not flattering, not great acting things that other people do across the table, and it's like a glaring light, and you're like, oh, okay, next time I will not do this. I will not reach to shake their hand. I will, because this person nailed it, but every 50 of these people all made these mistakes. And it's kind of like, once you see it and know it, you can almost bank it for yourself. Yeah. Right? You can almost bank it for yourself. I'll tell you, one of the biggest things that has helped me recently is Grammarly. That shit keeps me honest. Excuse my language. Grammarly's like, no, passive voice, no, don't do this, you know? And I've even gone in and mitigated my Grammarly to be like, always, here are my mistakes. Here are the things that I struggle with that my editor calls out every time. Or here's that thing I saw somebody else do that I don't want to ever do. So I go in and can tell it to start looking for those things to just help keep me honest, you know? Help keep me honest. Man, those are good suggestions. Those are good. And just like, I think any art form, you just... I think the curation, what Coral, you were just saying about curation, is tough, right? Because just because the editor doesn't like it doesn't make it bad. It just means that you
100%.
weren't the choice, you know? You just weren't the choice.
Yeah, I mean, if you edit anything long enough, you know, you're going to reject something that gets nominated for awards, maybe multiple awards. Maybe everybody else seems to love it, and you go back and you read it again, and you're like, I still don't get why everybody likes this. And sometimes you're like, oh, yeah.
I feel that way about a few classic books. I'm like, why?
Oh, yeah.
Why are we still reading Hemingway?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I mean, even within like science fiction and fantasy, I mean, I have those things where I'm like, I don't get why everyone loves that classic thing.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say real quick, something that Raj said, which is not what he was saying, but he mentioned something about his gut. And I'm like, oh, I was just talking about voice. Chuck Palahniuk is also a writer with great voice. Yes. He has a story called Guts that is amazing. It's online. You can read it. Yep. It is so visceral.
I was about to say, content warning for those of you that are stomach, not
for the faint of heart. Yeah. It is so visceral. Like, even having read it multiple times, I still read it and I like cringe. I have a physical reaction, and like nothing does that to me. You know, like I can read anything, I can watch anything, and nothing like bothers me like that. And it's like, man, that story, it's just like written so just like perfect. You know,
it's like teeth grinding.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way. It's like teeth grinding. Scared teeth grinding. Well, okay. So this. So I want to, as we are in the last 15 minutes. So last call for questions. But I want to. I'm going to save our big question for y'all's outros. But if we wrap back around to tabletop, what do you think is the one thing that we often forget in terms of world building for tabletop? What is the forgotten thing? The thing that makes worlds rich that we can't think about when we're dealing with monster blocks and stat blocks?
I mean, I think I think a lot of GMs do take this into account, but I think one thing that may get lost in the shuffle is really incorporating your players' backstories into your overall plan for what you're going to do. And I mean, I think that's probably less of an issue than it has been in the past, just because like things like Critical Role, where like
right,
it
where
goes
it's
to
all character driven.
yeah, and it just goes to a crazy degree to like incorporate all the backstory stuff. But I mean, that's like, I think that's really important to players, that it feels like their contribution actually matters more than just their actions in this adventure. And so I think, and that's a way to make them more of a collaborative partner in this overall story that you're telling. Yeah, and again, I mean, that's just like sort of an inference. I don't know that it really is a problem. But I mean, I have played in games where like that definitely was not a thing at all, and so I expect that it's probably a problem that's out there for some people, and some people probably don't care. But in terms of like making your world building as robust as it can be, I think yes, definitely lean on the people that you are playing with, to help expand that.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, for sure, and that leads right into Raj's essay, I think, right?
Yeah.
Other thoughts on the things we forget, the stuff that makes worlds rich, but sometimes we just forget to, or we don't give them enough attention.
I think it was sort of touched on by John, but I think, you can make the cultures and the religions and the politics and the economics and all that kind of stuff. But for me, lately, I've been finding that, it is the NPCs and the characters that help make things actually come alive, like the way that they experience that world and the way that they convey it. And I think it ties into what Coral was, her essay is about, which also like, trying to make them feel like individuals with their own, again, like if they're in the game for like 2 seconds, maybe you don't need to spend a lot of time, but, just making them feel like real individual characters rather than, a cookie cutter thing taken off the shelf. And even just for like, the if it is like a stall owner or something in a town, just, maybe an adjective or two that sets them apart from everyone else, like I think things like that can help make it feel alive in a way that they don't normally do. So.
Yeah. Good piece of advice. I love my NPCs. NPCs make worlds just like come to life, because these are people that live there.
Yeah, the people who inhabit your world, literally. So.
Literally, yeah, they're gonna be the culturally richest thing that you can give them without actually like spoon feeding world dialogue to them.
I think the biggest thing that has been a pet peeve of mine recently is, and I'm glad that a lot of the TTRPG world is moving away from it, is alignments as racial characteristics. Goblins are evil, and there's endless examples.
Right,
but
all
yeah,
Cleongs want to go to war.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. There's got to be the one peacenik Klingon, right?
Right.
And
that
he's
wants to
maybe
read
the
his
most
books
interesting one.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good one. I also, I always look at, I think sometimes we forget about celebrations. Like we use celebrations as a means to like define cultural history and heritage and all kinds of different things. And sometimes I think we forget about, for me, it's always about celebrations. Like, how much can you show people about a world when you get to see the things they celebrate, the things that they bring around once a year or once a cycle, however they're managing their annual cycles. But yeah, that's always a big one for me too, which I think shows a lot of that diversity of people. So all really good points.
And actually, I would add too, like, and this ties in with Coral's essay, but and also with Coral's game that she runs that I play in.
Nice.
I think a lot of like VTT tokens and stuff are very geared towards like a sort of a Caucasian white character, and there's very few like sort of pieces that are just sort of stock in a game or whatever that are black or brown, and I think it is definitely harder to find the art that matches, but Coral is like, she found so much dope art. Like every NPC is like, oh my God. I'm like, Like,
I'm in
who
love
is
with
that?
him.
Like,
Yes.
yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Like, sorry, I got lost staring into that one's eyes, you know.
Oh,
but,
trust me, my big heartthrob for VTM is Kadir. Like, my heart knows no bounds for the love of Kadir, the great sheriff of New York City.
Oh yeah.
So I feel that. Nice. That's very cool.
If you're an artist out there, please, we need more of every skin tone, and that's like greens and purples and
you know what? Speaking of
browns
art
and blacks and everything,
and the front cover of this book is beautiful. I don't know. I might be able to add it over our screen. I'm gonna put it over our faces because I think that's the only way I can do it. But I will show it to all of you here on the screen. It is so beautiful. It is, you know, what you might expect from Kobold Press because we don't even play when it comes to art. Here it is. Here's that beautiful world building
gorgeous
book showing quite a bit of diversity as well as just like what looks to be like a rich world. Like even staring at it I was like, oh, these people make their my phone went off. These people make their windows round. Right? Like that's such a simple thing. I was like, oh, that is like, it's like hobbit holes. Their doors are circular. Like what a small thing that says something about them. You know what I mean? So as we slowly wrap around and we round things up, I will double check chat hasn't come through with any additional questions, but the one I've been holding on to. Yeah, I fall down a bit with bringing in seasonal events. You know, I like to do events that aren't seasonal. Even think about death rituals. A huge part of individual cultures, and sometimes a celebration of a death ritual in itself is something that tells you about. There's a game I love called Overlight. It's right here on my shelf, and it's a fantasy-based setting. It's put out by Renegade, and it's one of the most interesting, diverse, like fantasy worlds I've ever seen. Based on color, all the magic is based on color, called chroma. But it has like 7 islands. The world has been broken up. 7 islands that are left. They're stacked, and each island kind of has their individual people. But there's one island, and the people here, though relatively humanoid, they all wear masks their whole lives. It's like part of their life. And when people die, they get their mask removed, which is the first and only time the first and last time that the family will ever see the real face of the person they put down. And that's like such a huge thing, a defining thing for like a culture to like watch that process of like somebody gives up their entire visible identity to a mask that now becomes their identity that you spend your whole life decorating, that eventually gets removed from you only upon your death. Yeah, this is the way. Yeah, which I think is just it was just a beautiful thing. That world is very, very rich and very, very interesting. But yeah, y'all, I've learned so much, and it's been so nice to hang out with you. Unfortunately, we're wrapping up, or I have more questions, but I can't get them all answered today. But if you have more questions, chat, join us next week. We're going to have some more writers on from this book to talk about their essays, which is obviously different than this group. And I can say Keith Baker will be on, which I think everybody's really super stoked about because Keith is a fantastic writer. So, an important question as we wrap up. So, 2 things. 1, who are you? Where can we find you when you're not writing for Kobold Press? 2, do you have a favorite Kobold Press book? Just shout it out. Let us know. And I think this is an important question that we'll wrap on, which is, how do you feel about mirroring real life events in games? So, since I went counterclockwise, I will go clockwise this time. John, you are up first.
Okay. Well, I guess a favorite Kobold Press book is probably just Tales from the Shadows for me, just because that was the first thing that I worked on for that. So
I'm so excited.
Yeah. So I edited that, and it was a revelation to me to actually do that. Because it's like, I'd read adventures, but I never really like worked on it in that level. And it's like, oh, this is almost like playing D&D. This is great. So that's that. Sorry, that was a multi-part question. What were the other parts of it?
Oh, who am I? Yeah. Who are you? We'll do that one last. But what about mirroring real life events in your
mirroring?
world?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something definitely. I mean, if you're in a tabletop game, you definitely want to check with your players to make sure that they're okay with anything like that, because maybe they're playing the game because they want to escape from that stuff. And so, it's like one of those things. But and then as far as fiction. I mean, sometimes you do. I mean, and it depends on the story. I mean, sometimes you want to do it to make a point. Sometimes you need to mirror real life events because you have to show how ridiculous and wrong it is. And so, it's all about the context, I think, for that question to me. But I mean, in terms of role playing games, though, definitely like check with your players to make sure, because a lot of times like you don't want to be thinking about that.
No,
like
I'm definitely trying to escape all of the craziness that is our world. Yeah. Good point there. And of course, Tales from the Shadows, y'all, is the second book that's part of the upcoming Ebb and Tides Kickstarter. You'll be able to get your grubby little kobold claws on that soon. So keep an eye out for that. All right, Raj, same questions. Favorite Kobold Press book, thoughts on real world events, and where can we find you?
So I think John nailed the answer on thoughts on real world events. I don't think I'd change anything about that. I mean, I think in fiction it's contextual, and I think in gaming fine, but I also agree that you should check with your players. I'm against pushing things on people that they're not interested in experiencing in a game. In terms of Kobold, so like I contributed some stuff to Tome of Heroes, and I'm excited to see it, but I haven't seen it, so I can't call that my favorite. But I would say I'm going to go just like Tome of Beasts, because I'm putting together a massive campaign right now, and that, and also Creature Codex and Tome of Beasts too. Like
so helpful.
And I mean, just the wealth of monsters and creatures and things that I've been able to pull out of there, that especially the players that I'm working with, aren't as familiar with as they are the typical, stuff that's been around for 40 years. So yeah, those are all great. And I guess in terms of me, it's probably easy just to go to my website, which is myname.com, and like that has all my it's not up to date, but it should have all my upcoming stuff. You can Google me. There are stories out there if you want to check my stuff out. Actually, I will say I'll pick up on what John said before. If you Google Card Sharp, if you're interested in that, that's one of my best received stories so far. John also published that one, but it's out there on the web, and I think it's fun and different. So.
Cool. And Coral, same questions.
Oh boy, I don't even remember. No, I do. I'm just kidding. Let's take them in a different order. I'm going to cheat off of Raj's answer.
Do it.
Because I'm building a campaign, and Tome of Beasts has been so helpful for finding different things that's not just in the regular books that you come across. And Creature Codex too is really excellent. And then where you can find me, Twitter is probably the easiest place. Coral M, easy to spell. And the real life events, that was the other one. I remember them all. I think John's answer was really good on that. You absolutely should, if everyone in the game is interested in pursuing those things. And I think that's a really important thing, because stuff is traumatizing sometimes.
Right.
People don't want to deal with those things necessarily in their worlds that they're trying to escape from our real world in. If you want to like have a campaign all about pandemics, maybe ask first. I don't know. But you can do it, and you can do it very well and in ways that are very meaningful to people, but you have to make sure that that's what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I dropped some links if they were given. I tried to anyways. Hopefully they're correct, y'all. They're in chat. John, what are you on Twitter?
Yeah, I neglected to say where I am. Well, I'm on Twitter at just John Joseph Adams. I'm not on Twitter really much anymore. I mean, I'm still technically there, but my website's just johnjosephadams.com. There's also Lightspeed magazine, where if you want to read some science fiction and fantasy stories, like including, I think I reprinted Card Sharp there. I don't remember. I'm sure I must have. I also am a producer for the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast,
Nice.
which airs on Wired.com, and it's a fun time. I occasionally appear there as a guest these days, but so that's where you can find me.
Cool. All right, y'all. We do have to wrap up. One, because it is time, and two, because Kobolds clearly have some writing to do and some things to be working on, because they're busy people out there.
Yeah.
Looks like we've got some love for Lightspeed, the podcast, in chat.
Oh, nice.
Little love from chat. Y'all, I'm Little Red Dot. You can find me where Little Red Dots are found on the internet, Twitch, Twitter, the social media of your choice. Go look it up. But most of the time, I'm over here wearing my Kobold badge as the Twitch producer for Kobold Press. I'm dabbling in the writing for Kobold Press, so there may be some things coming down the pipelines. Keep an eye out. Not the worst or best, but you know what? You can start somewhere. Other than that, I encourage you, go pick up Kobold Press Guide to World Building Volume 2. I'll drop that again in chat if you haven't already. The PDF is available. Hard copies are in pre-order, which means you'll have them by early April 2022, so not too far around the corner. And we'll be chatting with more of the writers from this same book next week. We'll be bringing them in to talk about their essays and more of what you can expect from these great guides. I tell people the Kobold guides are they're like panels in a book.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we go to all these cons, we pay all this money, we sit at these panels to have people tell us this stuff, but really these great guides are like mini versions of that, where you get to sit down with one person who has an expertise in something and they get to tell you all about it in just a couple pages. So we've got a bunch of these guides. World building, there's one for game mastering, there's one for there's monster building, all kinds. So go check it out on the website, and you can join us back here, same Kobold time, same Kobold channel next week as we dive into more of Kobold Guide to World Building Volume 2. Thank you all so much for joining me. Have a fantastic afternoon, and remember to be excellent to one another. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.